complete.
You're complete. You're complete. You are complete.
Hi.
Hi. Nick Cave, obviously, and we're happy to welcome Nick back to the Norton Museum, the new Norton Museum. Nick had the great pleasure of seeing the before and the after, since we hosted his exhibit 10 years ago, which was Meet Me at the Center of the Earth, and spoke of a sense of collaboration and compassion. This movie we just saw, which is titled Upright, is the result of not only honoring the sound suit, which has been an essential artistic sculpture and part of his practice, but also this expansive direction the sound suits have taken Nick. And I'm hoping you would be able to talk further about where this film was made, with whom, and the whole genesis of how the sound suit has become so important in this definition of identity.
Yeah, this project, this film titled Upright was done in Detroit. What I tend to do is, I may do an exhibition in a museum, but I'm very much more invested in sort of working outside of the museum within communities. And so this particular piece, the performers in the video was working with the Ruth Ellis Center in Detroit, which is a youth center for LGBT teens that have been kicked out of their home. So I'm very interested in sort of ways to sort of invest my sort of self, my practice into ways in which perhaps one could sort of inform, inspire, influence, validate. And so, we were working with them for about a week in residence with the center, which was fantastic. I mean, what you see is the sort of end result, but really, the really sort of important work is really what happens behind the scenes. Being with that group of wonderful young people was just sort of fascinating to sort of, they don't know me, I don't know them. And how do we sort of build trust right off the top? And so it's really about that. It's about them understanding the project, what we are doing. This project really is this sort of rite of passage, which is important. I was a kid that grew up without my father being present, but I understood that sort of rite of passage, which I did receive from my grandfather. So it's, what role do we play in one's life, and how do we sort of transition them into the next sort of phase of existence? So it's really about that and stripping down as you saw them do, and then, you're seeing them being rebuilt.
And it's like this ritual that you use the sound suit as this means to establish this ritual and almost fortify and strengthen them. I mean, you have this phrase at the end of it, "You are complete." And it was very moving, I thought, to see this and their faces as they were being dressed in this extraordinary armor or costume, and then having this kind of confidence as if they've passed over to another identity possibly, or feeling comfortable with the identity that they have. And it seems like that ritual was very much a part of how you use the sound suit.
Yes, and for me it's it's a number of things. It's me sort of thinking about, I'm interested in, my audience sort of getting the sort of behind the scenes of how a sound suit is built, for example. So how can I sort of do that, but yet use that idea in a sort of in a performative sort of manner? Mm-hmm. And so I'm sort of providing these sort of two amazing sort of moments for them, for me, for you.
Because most people have no idea what is underneath at all, which was part of the point of the
Right.
sound suit.
Right.
But tell me further about the location and this relationship with Detroit. You were at Cranbrook, for your master's. And I read somewhere that that also was the first moment when you were outstanding because of your skin color, that there weren't other black people in your class at the
Well, there
same
was,
time.
I was at Cranbrook, you know, 89, 90.
Not so long ago.
Not really, right? But, it was very, very, you know, I think when I went to grad school, I had no idea that I would be sort of encountering that sort of reality. I mean, to be the only black student in your entire class was really like a culture shock for me. And I just, all of a sudden, I just sort of, that's the first time I had to think about myself as a black male, which was very sort of strange and very complex, and not complex in terms of I did not know that, but
Right.
complex in this sort of setting, and really trying to grapple with what that feels like. I remember when I came into the department and
Is that
my
opposite?
colleagues at Cranbrook, they were like, "Oh, we didn't know you were black," which I was like, "I am."
Okay.
So, it's just like,
Ta-da.
it just started off right from the top, like, oh my God, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But, that also sort of gave me the fuel to sort of address that.
And how did you then find the relationship with Detroit? Because that's where this film was created, and it was as a result of that Cranbrook.
Well, Detroit was
Exhibit,
really
and
my
you went
savior.
this.
I mean, I could not have gotten through Cranbrook without Detroit. Detroit was, when I needed to get off that campus, I was in Detroit. And I was, surrounded by amazing sort of creative people, a lot of musicians. It was really sort of like an interesting sort of house music scene there. And so, and I would just, and so it was important for me to do this solo exhibition at the museum, but it was more important for me to sort of say to that team that I will only do this exhibition if I can do this work in Detroit because of the importance it had in my life at that particular time.
And I think this particular, the movie and this exhibition also speak of these other projects that you've been working on more recently. Someone just mentioned, animation in the back. Someone just mentioned the 2018 project in New York, the Let Go. Did anyone go and dance at the Park Avenue Armory? Okay, but it's this this very intentional expansion of being part of a greater community to make a difference, that seems, rather than just the sound suit, despite how seduced we are by the appearance of the sound suit. And we can talk about those a little bit more. But this is really critical to you now, it seems, this idea of going beyond the traditional exhibit in a museum, but instead really using the opportunity on another level.
Well, I think, as artists, and, for me, it's, what is my responsibility? What does that mean? I'm an artist with a civic responsibility. So it's the museums can't, in some cases, don't really know how or don't have the capacity to sort of work beyond certain boundaries. And so I'm interested in sort of opening that up and what can I do to sort of remove that sort of stigma and put myself in the position to change the sort of look of who's at the museums, how the museums sort of become sort of, how do they work, how do they use their educational programming, who are they reaching out to, and if I can be part of that sort of magnet to sort of facilitate that, that's really sort of what's important to me, and that's why I do it. And, I think right now there's so much to be said. There's so many people that don't have a voice. And how can you sort of create that sort of platform, that sort of space for other sort of creative people to sort of stand on and to sort of experience what is possible.
Did you find, it seems, especially for instance, the project that we just saw in the movie Upright was very successful in terms of maybe even having an impact on a group of people. But something like the Park Avenue Armory, for those who didn't experience it, do you want to tell them what you did? That's a huge facility with a background of training. Well, it has many uses, including art fairs. But
Right.
how did you conceive of the space? It was through Public Art Fund or Creative Time? I can't remember which.
No, it was really sort of the Park Armory and their sort of organization themselves.
Okay.
I just had come off of a major project at Mass MoCA,
Which you could talk about that.
which
too,
was
the belly of the sound suit.
yeah, which was really sort of Mass MoCA. There was this exhibition space in Gallery 5, which is the size of a football field, and it was
Massive.
for me, it's what I tend to do. I tend to sort of go to these spaces when there's an exhibition, so I can understand what that looks like. But then I also go back when there's nothing in the space, so that I can just lay my body in the center of the floor. Because just to take it in and sort of like to think, okay, here we go, and I have to process and understand the sort of scale, the vastness of it. And, so when they offered me the project, they came to my studio, and Denise Marconish, who's the head curator there, said, I would love for you to do this project at Mass MoCA under one stipulation. And she said, no sound suits. And I was like, yes. But I was already in that process of transitioning out of that sort of way of working. And so she said I would come back in a year and see what you've come up with.
And obviously you had this vast installation in
Well,
that area.
I really didn't think about it much because I had other projects happening.
doing
But
it.
what I was thinking about and what triggered what I was doing there was Trayvon Martin, Michael Gray, Michael Brown, Sandra Blaine.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the sort of so
Much.
profound and so dominant in my sort of existence. And remember, the first sound suit was in response to Rodney King. So, I was sitting in the studio one day and I was working, and the Michael Brown incident had just happened. And I thought, is there racism in heaven? And so that was the nemesis for the exhibition at Mass MoCA, titled Until.
Until, yes. And until the idea of, are you actually innocent until proven guilty? Are you guilty until proven innocent? Which, of course, has not been easily resolved for many people.
Right.
But
And so, but what I wanted to do was to put you into the belly of the sound suit, which is really what triggers me to sort of make that work. And it really sort of stems out of injustice,
right.
racial profiling. And so then I just made this sort of vast, sort of kinetic installation that supported this sort of crystal cloudscape that was hovering in the air that you had to walk up to the top. And
Amazing images of it.
yeah,
But that essence of the sound suit, that premise and that experience, and of course it's an inescapable perspective. You're a Black man dealing with the world today. So that never leaves, even if the sound suit is no longer. All right, excuse me. Turn your cell phones off, folks. But that never leaves, that essence of the sound suit. And even in the group of works that you're describing, that you were transitioning away from the sound suit, it's you still have a relationship with the sound suit, clearly, but there's a period now maybe 5 years ago, I guess it was maybe around 2013 that you started not emphasizing the sound suit in your practice and had started focusing on these objects, like the small sculpture of a black jockey. Or I remember, actually, it was around the time that you were here where you said, I have just seen the most amazing things. And it was the beginning of finding material that was stereotyping the image of Black people in these other formats as objects. And I remember you talking about that with being rather stunned that A, it existed, and then how could I use this? This has got to be addressed. And
Yeah, well, it's not that it was not that I wasn't familiar with it. I mean, I spend, a large part of my sort of, time sort of scouting and gathering resources and things all over the country, the world. But it's really sort of, it's really when you run across these objects that are so profound in terms of the sort of degree of repression that is sort of applied to them and the sort of outrage that they carry, that I was just interested in that particular object. And so I really spent about 2 years just sort of scouting out these extreme sort of racist sort of objects. And the title of that exhibition was Made by Whites for Whites,
yeah,
uh,
gallery.
which also was a sort of a magazine that was a takeaway that you, after you saw the exhibition, you could take a magazine away that really sort of was a number of articles about a number of writers addressing objects, racist objects in that way. So, it's really sort of, again, and I'm sort of like looking at these sort of objects and wanting to sort of renegotiate the power in them, because I find them to be very powerful. On one hand, it's very negative. On the other hand, it's very, very much what fuels the work, what uh, allows me to sort of expand on that conversation, force you to have it, and also renegotiate how I'm going to shift
The
how we read it.
And that's critical and not easily done if you ignore it. You
Well, I have
to
a
take
choice.
it
I
on.
could, but I choose not to. It's again, it's just part of what I'm interested in. It's part of me sort of taking on the complexity of isms altogether, and being responsible. It's not. I have. It's all sort of built around purpose. Why am I here? I'm not really here to make beautiful things.
Although you do.
Well, that's only what you see on the surface. But there's deeper sort of meaning that's built within that. Uh, and so that sort of building of that is really sort of it's how I feel about myself. In terms of you know uh, grounded, sort of extraordinary in this sort of interesting sort of way, not sort of liberated in this work.
I thought the song that you chose for the choir to sing in upright, this wonderful, if I can help somebody, that Mahalia Jackson, that if I can help somebody as I travel along, if I can help somebody with a word or a song, if I can help somebody from doing wrong, no, my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I'm singing the song, my living shall not be in vain. And it continued and comes to this well, but it seems to embody this attitude that you have also now in this expansive practice that you're engaged in and that you're originating. It's not just an opportunity that's given to you. You're actually creating that expansive opportunity and then passing it on to other people, whether in upright or in the more delight of a daily activity like dancing. How did you get people to actually come out? What did you do at the Armory?
At the Armory. The Armory, that piece titled The Let Go, again, it's all sort of based around, right now, and it's, I feel like we're in this sort of, very complex time, moment.
Yeah.
And so what do we need to do to sort of, what are the mechanisms that we need to sort of take in order to unify, to continue to sort of bring us together, to continue to impact and sort of again expand our way of sort of responding and to one another. And the Let Go was really about that. It was about, it was a magnificent project. It was mass. The Armory is this sort of again huge drill hall. And so what I decided to do there after coming off of Mass Smoker, which was very sort of made of thousands of objects, here I wanted to strip down and just have one single object in that space. And so I decided to have this sort of kinetic sort of mylar curtain that basically sort of occupied the whole space and moved through the entire drill hall on this track. And so just that object in you is very interesting to me, because whether or not you are interested in dance or movement, you have to, because you have to interact with this object that is coming toward you, that's wrapping you within space. So there's this sort of relationship that's built in the object. And then I sort of curated about 30 DJs that came every Thursday, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays. And then there was 40-day sort of activators, which were dancers that would be there every day. So that when an audience would come in, they would just sort of corral them, and before you know it, you were like dancing within the space. And it was really about being liberated. And although we all are very different, were these moments that we come together and we sort of, in this sort of celebratory sort of moment, in spite of our differences. And
Physical, I mean, the body is the body, right?
yeah, and have this sort of amazing sort of moment. So it was about that. We also did Upright the performance there, working with the youth choir from Harlem, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, and so.
And it's still connected with the sound suit, and in terms of having that kind of passage of somebody understanding where the sound suit had come from, the reason for it, and then going beyond that. And I think this transition out of the sound suit into these other programs has been something that almost makes you question, is the sound suit, is that over? I mean, you've made, what,
I think at the
500
Park
of
Armory,
them?
that was a sound suit. Although it was one linear object, but it moved like a sound suit would move. And so, how do we define that? I don't think I think about it in terms of whether or not it's over. It's never over. It's been a decade since I've built one.
Is that right?
Yeah. But I'm thinking about this sort of the next generation of what that looks like. I've been thinking about it lately. It's coming.
See,
And it's going to, it's,
and then
huh?
no, I was just thinking back when you were here the last 10 years ago, and you had said, I think it was one of those well, what are you working on, Nick, or what have you been looking at? And you said, well, I found all these white buttons, and then the piece that the museum owns, and then the Cormans kindly lent a piece too. And
Well, let me tell you, the garment industry has changed so much in New York, and I'm thinking, where am I going to find white shell buttons? Like, I need thousands. And I happened to be in New York one weekend. I went to a flea market. There is this guy. That's all he has. It's like billions of buttons. His name is Sandy. He lives in Dallas.
Got it.
And he said he had just bought this button factory.
Oh.
And so, like, he sends me whatever I need.
Oh, so they're still making buttons, which is
Well,
good.
I don't know if they're making them, but he
He's
has
got 'em.
this enormous quantity. So it's things, it's like it's out there.
Yeah, something will.
And what I need is outside of my studio. So when we resource, me and Bob will jump on a plane and get a one-way ticket to Washington State, and we'll just rent a cargo van. We'll pull out our phones and we'll just put in like flea markets, antique malls as we travel back to Chicago, and we'll just source that way. That's how I sort of find what I need.
Can you talk, and I don't think it often comes up, but talk about your practice in relationship to your teaching. I mean, this mentoring idea certainly comes out in what you're doing. It seems all the time, that idea you have a mission and that you're making a difference. And you do that also as a professor. And you have it's not just fashion arts and textile. It's an interesting Masters of Design in
Fashion, body, and garment.
So
it's really,
fashion,
it's a
body,
group
and
of
garment.
amazing students that are really sort of working like I work, really across the board. Some are doing collections, some are doing sculpture, some are doing video performance. And so it's really makes up for an amazing program. Mm-hmm. It's 24 students.
So it's an expansion of the idea of not strictly fashion, but an expansion of that idea that becomes one element within the artistic result.
Yeah, it's really about, the body being the central core and building around and within that. Mm-hmm. So it's great. It's hard.
I'm sure.
And I'm hard. And,
I
know it's not that I'm hard. I expect a lot.
Right.
And what I tend to do is, it's really about, it doesn't take much for me to see where your potential lies. Mm-hmm. And so once I understand that, and I know that, not everyone can be pushed the same way, but everyone can sort of arrive to this sort of place of excellence within this sort of 2-year sort of course of study. So I'm always sort of very excited about the thesis show and really sort of, carrying them through that entire sort of rigor to that as the conclusion. And it's, it's great.
Do you, I think we're running out of time, but I wanted to just ask this. Even tonight, we had someone very kindly share something that was handmade and very much a part of her family to give to you. This idea, though, of really accepting the energy and talent of other people comes out even in the elements that you use in your sculptures, or were using sculpture.
Well, I think it's all about nostalgia and sort of memory, and I think that, we can sort of, think about like, what are the ways that I'm interested in sort of pulling you into the work? What are these elements? And a lot of these elements we can sort of identify with. We've had them around us in some form or another. And they're also, they're becoming this sort of lost sort of way of making. And so I'm interested in sort of, celebrating that sort of lost art form. Yeah.
And having that. Should we open up to the audience? Would you like to ask some questions? Yes, you were the first one. You want to stand up first so we can hear you better? So the question is, she's familiar with Detroit and Cranbrook, but what was the location for
Yeah,
the
that was
movie?
at Michigan Theater. Yeah, which now is converted into a parking lot. I mean, isn't that amazing? Like, what?
It's
But yeah,
incredible
I mean,
shell.
it's fantastic. Yeah.
And how did you scout out those places? You were telling me that you didn't necessarily know exactly where the projects were going to take you,
Yeah,
nor
you know
even the
what?
community.
What we tend to do is like, when we're working on a project, this is really what's important. It's like, I have an idea. I'm coming to Shreveport, Louisiana. Let's just say I have done that. Uh, and so, we bring the project, but we are interested in hiring the community to build the project. So that's really the way in which I'm interested in working. And so we get on the ground, we get our feet on the ground, and we sort of get into the trenches, and we're sort of out scouting and looking around at places and spaces, and sort of, again, sort of thinking more about how do we sort of how do we sort of move communities that are sort of, they stay within their sort of,
Parameter.
yeah, and over here, and sort of vice versa, and sort of, there may be a performance here one day, but then there may be three on this west side, and so it's really sort of cross pollinating and sort of shifting our sort of placements ourselves.
The exposure also to just this completely new community, or community recognizing that there are people. You were telling me, like, even the idea that bringing dancers and artists together within one building because you have a new structure in Chicago that you're working on. This kind of sounds like a exhibition slash community slash performance space that you've taken on in a new building.
Yeah, we just sort of bought a new building. It's called Facility. And it's really sort of where studios are housed. My studio, Bob Faust Design Studio, who's my partner, Jack Cave, my brother, his studio. But then also the building will also function as this sort of flux space that will program, performances, installations. We'll invite artists to come and do projects. And it's really sort of the way in which the world sort of works. Nothing stands still. Everything is always sort of in motion. Nothing's forever. It's always sort of shifting. So we're thinking a lot about operating that space in that way. Uh, you know, it's amazing. The space, the building was surrounded by amazing art throughout the building, which is really important.
There's extraordinary artists that come out of Chicago. I mean, when you were discussing, even when we were looking at some of the other work on view in the museum, is it because of a relationship with the openness to art, whether an institution provides that kind of dynamism that's needed for artists to thrive? What is it about Chicago that you think has made it possible to be there? I mean, you're there partly because you have a job there,
I
obviously,
don't,
but
I think it's, for me, it's, yes, it's my hub, but it allows, I'm glad I'm there and not in New York, me,
yeah.
because I am too, I'm attracted to too many things. I could be totally fully in fashion if I was in New York,
Yeah.
or, so it allows me to sort of stay focused. It allows me this sort of amazing sort of playground to sort of experiment. And so I tend to just sort of, and it allows me to just sort of, it's really about just sort of, I can get quiet there and I'd be distracted. And then I just produce these sort of dream sort of projects, and then I just sort of put them out in the world. So that's what it does for me.
Right.
It's,
Can't speak for others.
yeah, and it's funny. I live there, but I find that my studio is a home away from home a lot. So
To be able to have that.
yeah,
You have another question? Yes. Sorry. Okay. Yes, right here.
thank you.
So, so the question is, with all these elements that and hundreds of elements to a sound suit, is there a length of time that it takes to produce these? Since you do it all by yourself.
Well, they vary, but I have, it takes special sort of assistance, but most, all the assistants, they come from this sort of practice. Uh, they're sort of makers, they are technicians, they can sit for 8 hours and do this kind of work.
And even the armature of the costume that we saw in the movie is extraordinary. You have to
Yeah,
do
and the
that.
armatures, I work with fabricators outside the studio that build all of that. Yeah, so it's not, I just don't hire anyone. To even be hired to work in the studio, you come in for a 1 day test.
Oh, really? How do you
So
make
like
that
my
test up?
studio manager, she has this sort of list of things you must do. You get a supply kit and you have to do these things within the 8 hours. And
And to
so it's
see how well
about
you do
that,
it?
but it's
Right.
also about whether or not you just sort of leave the studio or that space a disaster, or do you
Right.
clean up and you're tidy in order,
Well,
will determine whether or not you're working in the studio. So
Oh,
it's
but-
not, it's not always like whether or not you have the skill or you may, but it's also about, how
you
you sort of
approach.
handle and sort of care about
Mm-hmm.
your surrounding that you're working in.
Even in the movie, it seemed as if people had been instructed how to fold their clothes. Is that possible?
Oh yeah, that's part of, but that's that's just part of talking about a ritual that we do
Yeah, the whole
ourselves
ritual or
every day.
routine
Yeah,
that we make
that
ourselves.
routine and what does that mean and how does that that methodical sort of way of doing something and what that sort of it's like making your bed every day. It's like something about that is sort of is an accomplishment,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting to think about it that way. And
Right.
it sort of also sort of brings you back to sort of things in which you've been taught to do,
What your
which are
breakfast
orderly and proper.
that your mom would like.
And my mother would be very happy.
There is someone with a white jacket. This is going to be the question. How did you choose the people that you were working with in the movie
film?
and how you addressed them? Yeah. Well, the material for the piece were also materials you had and recognized sound suits.
Well,
that were
the actual objects were made first. And it really was sort of, it's me sort of working in the studio, working with my photographer on set and sort of responding to the question of, how do you make that? And so it was me sort of like, how can I sort of allow sort of you to sort of see how Soundsuit is built? Uh, the materials are really sort of things that I have to take a lot of things into consideration in terms of weight, in terms of stress on materials, things of that sort. It has to look like, but it has to be in abundance at the same time. So it's really understanding sort of material language, how things work, how things move. And then the individuals that were in the piece, we were very much interested in working with the Ruth Ellis Center and these young LGBT kids,
and it was a new
that were, where they're, sort of discarded from their homes, and that is complicated and
astounding.
astounding. And so, just to sort of work with them and to let them know that they matter. I mean, these are things that are sort of simple things that you can do that can sort of influence and change someone's life. So,
It's incredible. And the person sitting right next to you who's been trying to ask a question. Thank you. Yes, what's your question?
what are you wearing first? Yeah, come down here and let me see it.
But don't knock the camera. Yeah, thanks. No, okay. Come around the bend here. Okay.
And it does make sound, that's for sure.
Your sound suit. Sound suit. You,
Okay,
you have
what
a
are you doing?
question?
Okay, you're here. What are you going to do? A performance?
No, we're not gonna dance.
What?
I don't know how to dance. We can dance a little.
Oh, she said you can dance.
She
So
wants to dance, but we'll talk.
no, it's great.
Okay. You have a question too?
Kind of.
Okay.
So we've been living in Detroit for the last 3 years.
Oh, great,
Um,
fabulous.
I'll repeat that.
in Detroit for the last 3 years, partly on these and some other outfits and pieces. We're talking with MoCat and
Okay.
hoping to put together a show, but we were up there. Coincidentally, I grew up here. I'm home, and my mom took us here. You're here.
Yay, yay for mom.
We grabbed our suits. We ran back.
It's fabulous.
You're talking about your white buttons, and we're OIO, and we want to be your next white button.
Okay. Thank you. So the question is, can they be your next white button? Okay, that's the question. I think you have
we'll
a
talk.
You have to do a test. You have to pass the test. It sounds like.
So we'll
No,
we'll
but
do our
great.
best to find you, and hopefully we're easy enough to be found.
Well, you stand out.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
great.
much. Thank you.
Thanks for wearing
Thank
these.
you.
It's awesome. Hey, Margot. Hey, thank you.
We have one more question. Time for one more question. Yes. Hi. Wait till they walk by. We can't hear you. Okay. Now your question, and then I'll repeat it for people.
So what sort of emotional responses did you get from the kids when they put on their dances in the movie? Like, was there kind of, did you see afterwards that they kind of felt embraced and loved?
So the question is, what was the emotional reaction, or if there was one, by the people, the young people you worked with in the movie, since it was such a
Yeah. I
intimate
mean, we're working with
relationship?
them for, about 10 days. So, so we're in residence with them. We pick them up every morning to bring them to the studio. So we're not, and each individual has a partner, which is, that's the dresser, yeah. So you're in contact with your partner. So you're making decisions, for example, like what each object may mean based on your conversation with your partner. You're sort of talking to one another about each other and circumstances or what have you. And so it's not that they get into the work right away. It's really about sort of understanding what we're about to embark on. We take a photograph of them in the object as well so that they can see, and they take that with them every day so they can sort of see themselves becoming these sort of shaman. And we talk about what that means. And we just sort of go through this entire process. It's repeated probably 5 times a day. Undressing, dressing, undressing, dressing. What does it feel like? What's happening? So it's a transformation that's going on. It's very sort of slow, but very calculated. And at the beginning, they were really not open. But then by the end of the week, they were like amazing to work with. It was fabulous, actually. And so, it's really a process. It's really sort of them understanding it's a shared sort of opportunity experience. They could pull out at any given moment. It's not about that they must do it and they're tied to this.
Have you had that experience, that idea of the sound suit, or in particular this kind of time together and the ritual that you've imposed in that time together? Have you done that with other groups of young people?
Oh, yeah.
So it's
pretty much every
more that's-
performance that we do sort of involves a
Comes this-
sound suit of some sort. It may be Heard that we did at Grand Central Station in New York, where we worked with the Avenaley School, and that was 60
It's
performers.
incredible.
And so, but that was amazing too. Again, it's really sort of this sort of ongoing sort of rehearsal practice sort of session for 1 week. And we're also sort of talking about, what we're sort of the ideas of transformation and sort of what we're sort of experiencing and what the audience will be receiving and how does the audience, what role do they play in
And
the sort of the experience in the process. And so, yeah.
So the what you do to that space that you are working within. I mean, Grand Central is already kind of this powerful spot within Manhattan, and then to bring in something that you're not quite sure what comprises it and why they're here. I mean, almost like these were characters that came through.
Yeah, and it's they're wearing an artwork, and what does that mean, and how do you sort of, the proper way of putting it on and taking it off, and so it's a lot of things that
Have to happen.
that are happening through this sort of exercise of sort of changing one sort of character and identity.
Becoming another.
So it's rarely that I just have someone put on a suit and you start moving. It's not possible.
Well, I think I even read that you actually have, if there is a performance, if there is something, that you actually establish a relationship between the wearer and the suit. It's like the person must first get to
Yeah, you have to
know-
understand that you are going to be sort of transitioning from one thing to another, and how do you sort of give to that moment? So it's really about sort of this really slow kind of process of it's touching and understanding what that means. It's holding and understanding weight,
to go into.
and then we sort of go from there.
So we're going to look forward to something else that's going to happen with materials that you're still thinking about, and that relationship to the sound suit never really completely disappearing. It sounds like.
Right.
We'll see. Thank you very much, Nick
Sure.
Kay.
Thank you.